I have explained to your advocate that I have pared these cross-examination notes back a little, so you don't need all of the documents that I mentioned yesterday. This morning, for my purposes, you will need only the Statement of Appeal for Scheme 2, CD 197, Mr. Lowry's report, and your written evidence, so obviously your report, your rebuttal precognition and your precognition, and that, I think, should suffice. So this morning, or at the start, I want to continue to explore with you what you think about certain aspects so that we can have a better understanding amongst us about your evidence on certain parts. And I want to speak with you first of all about associationism. And presumably we can agree, because I don't think this is at all controversial, that by the 19th century a key aspect of the picturesque was a connection with associationism. And in Calton Hill we can see that very much, can't we? Because when Robert Adam built the Bridewell, he chose the cast form as a counterbalance almost to the castle, and to show its strength and impermeability, its authority and its law. Would you have any disagreement with that?
No, I wouldn't.
And that juxtaposition of that style with the classical also has associations, and we can see that, can't we, in Mikkel Kemp's lithograph in your heritage statement, document CD 197 on page 25.
Yes, I have it.
Yeah, and if you look at the caption to the left of that lithograph, quite far down your text, you point out there that there has been artistic license used in that lithograph, coming back to a little on what we were talking about yesterday, to diminish what you call the imposing structures at the eastern end of Calton Jail. And it's this contrast, isn't it, between the enlightened classical world and the Acropolis, including the former Royal High School, with the unenlightened world of criminality, isn't it?
Criminality, but also the darkened images relate to the foreground, to the crags, which are part of the framing of that view.
And just so that we're clear, Stark was talking about a huge urban design, wasn't he? And so was Playfair, but Hamilton was designing a school within those areas.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, and this was part of a kind of recentering, if you like, of the city. And so where some might think of the Royal High School as being on a fabricated terrace, if you like, somewhat at the edge, this is not going to be the overall vision in terms of what was being contemplated by the city at that time.
No, I would agree with that, in that Thomas Hamilton's High School is part of that plan. It relates to the terrace alongside, it relates to the massive works of civil infrastructure that were done prior to that site being selected for the school, the reshaping of the hill, the reshaping of Carlton Drive, and the resetting of the Royal High School on its own elevated terrace to give it great prominence within that overall composition.
Yes, indeed. And these are questions simply of fact, so I wouldn't expect them to take very long. But Archibald Elliott's, twin portico buildings, they're on Waterloo Place, and they are to the west of the Royal High School, aren't they?
They are indeed, yes.
Yeah. Where did the Masonic procession to lay the foundation stone start for the school?
I do not recall correctly, but I would imagine that it would start at that point.
I'm advised, and I wonder if this might jog your memory somewhat, that it started at Register House, so to the west.
I accept that.
Do you happen to know where Hamilton lived, Mr. Wright?
All his drawings were signed in York Place.
Yes, indeed. So he also lived to the west of the Royal High School, didn't he?
He did, yes.
Can we agree that the dictionary definition or a common understanding of the word discredit is to harm the good reputation of something or someone, to make them seem false or unreliable?
I don't think I disagree with that, but there may be other definitions from other sources.
And if you're fabricating, Mr. Wright, you're inventing something in order to deceive.
What, in order to discredit? So by discredit, to deceive someone? I don't make the connection between those two verbs.
Well, if you are fabricating something, the meaning of fabricating something is inventing something in order to deceive, but you did make that connection, Mr. Wright. You made it very clearly in your criticism of the AHSS in your report at paragraph 6.11, and I think we need to look at that now. And you say there, I have also experienced at first hand how these heightened levels of apprehension are manifested in the increasing extent to which the city's leading amenity bodies have sought to frustrate schemes in the pipeline by fabricating evidence against them. For the appellant's proposals, this claim can be laid fairly at the door of the Architectural Heritage Society of Scotland in setting out to discredit the proposals for Scheme 1 from the moment that the proposals had been announced in February 2015. But you've not presented any evidence to the inquiry, Mr. Wright, to back up your assertion, have you?
What follows on from that is what I say, that this was done without seeking a balancing view. And as far as I'm aware, I was certainly not contacted to take part in any public meeting which had been arranged to discuss the scheme. And as far as I know, neither had any other members of the appellant's team been invited to do that. That is what I would consider to be a balanced approach to discussing evidence which may be put forward at something which is advertised as a public meeting.
So, Mr. Wright, would you take it from me that we have an email exchange with Bruce Hare inviting him to attend a meeting, and his decision not to attend and address that meeting so that both sides of the position could be presented at the public meeting?
You may have that evidence. I must declare that I wasn't aware of that.
And just rowing this back slightly, Mr. Wright, we have agreed that in order to discredit something, the word that you use, the intention of somebody is to harm the good reputation of something or someone, and by fabricating, you are inventing something in order to deceive. Can I take it that that somewhat intemperate criticism levelled at our clients is solely because they didn't invite your clients, as you understand it, factually and accurately, to attend a meeting?
But it also relates to the evidence which appears in the Architectural Heritage Society Journal, which followed that meeting and thereafter. That's also what I'm referring to.
But you've not presented that evidence, Mr. Wright, to the inquiry, and if the evidence is not before the inquiry, the reporters can't take it into account, can they?
I would accept that.
If you look at your report at 5.1.3, you describe your heritage statement as having academic rigour. So if your report has academic rigour, I'm assuming therefore that we can take to infer from what you are meaning that it has been prepared with some accuracy, and we should import that into our consideration of it.
When I indicate here that it has academic rigour, when I have been called upon to give references that relate to quotations, as you'll see in my precognition and rebuttal precognition. I've been able to do so from the evidence from which I've amassed the study here. So that is the evidence to which I would draw you in backing up that claim. I also recall that in the heritage statement, I made it quite clear what the status of the document was and that it was prepared for a planning application. So it should not be compared with something which is either a paper which is written for entry in the Architectural Heritage Society Journal, for which I have submitted, as you suggested to me yesterday. I've done that on 2 occasions where documents have been submitted with full academic rigor.
I'm not questioning previous publications that are not before the inquiry. Well, to be fair, Mr. Steele, I'm asking questions quite quickly in an effort to try to release your witness from cross-examination quickly. And in fairness, Mr. Steele, talking about publications that are not before the inquiry is not really very fair.
But if I could add, it does relate to a question you put to me yesterday as to whether I had and these are subject to peer review. And I hold the Architectural Heritage Society Journal very highly among the publications that are published, and it's been done for something like 25 years now, and it does require absolute academic rigor to be accepted for that and to be accepted for the peer review that goes with that. And it may be of interest to the inquiry in terms of what that actually means. There is feedback on what goes into the public domain in terms of how many people read those documents and the number of documents which are preferred from those journals which they choose to read, which they find of interest. And the article that I wrote for the Architectural Heritage Society, which was entered in the journal about 5 years ago, for 2 years was the most read of the articles as it was put on the Edinburgh University portal in relation to that document.
So you are not claiming any of that academic rigor applies to your heritage statement then?
I'm saying that the same academic rigor in terms of taking a number of sources in order to assimilate the evidence from those sources and then bring them into a document which is readable for a very wide audience here. It is not just technical people which will be reading this. I'm very much aware that there will be members of the public who will be looking at these documents. These documents, I think, as it will be very much aware to those who are involved in inquiries and in planning applications, they're very often purely technical reports. I maintain that this isn't that, and the fact that it is done as a series of essays to draw attention to what are gaps in understanding, and those gaps in understanding go right back to the discussions that were held during the 2014 design workshops, which takes us back to that process, where gaps in the knowledge was something which had been discussed and agreed with Historic Scotland at that time in relation to conservation plans that have been prepared for the site. So this is a build-up of knowledge in terms of ensuring that all of the angles are carried both fully and in a very balanced way.
Can we accept, Mr. Wright, just as a matter of fact, the existence of a non-technical summary?
Whatever that may mean under the planning system, I cannot tell, but that is for others to decide.
So the non-technical summary that has been produced as part of the EIA process for both of your schemes here has not had any input or overview from yourself.
Sorry, could you rephrase the question to me? The technical
There are two
summary.
non-technical summaries that require, as a matter of law, to be produced in accordance with an environmental impact assessment. And the non-technical summary, the purpose of it is designed to give a summary in a non-technical manner of the proposed development. Can I take it from your answer that you're not aware of it, that you had no input or overview of the non-technical summaries that have been produced by your clients for these proposals.
Could you produce those for me to look at, please? And I will give you the answer that you seek.
Does my friend wish them put to the witness? If so, could you give us a document reference number of the ones that she is interested in?
Well, it's a non-technical summary for the 2015 application, and it's a non-technical summary for the 2017 application. And in fairness, I don't have those document reference numbers to hand, but I'm assuming that one of your colleagues will be able to help out, Mr. Wright. CD 185, I'm told, for the 2017 one. So I'm being told, yes. And CD 18, I'm also being told, for the 2015 version. Do you remember that document now, Mr. Wright?
I recall it vaguely, but I've had no part, as far as I'm aware, in the entries, which they may have been passed for me to be looked at, but I have to say I have no recollection of that.
So just as a general principle, Mr. Wright, the appellants rely heavily on your work. We explored that yesterday, and you accepted that. And you must accept as well, Mr. Wright, that the reporters and ministers have to be able to look at what you produce and consider it and test it so that they're able to afford to it the appropriate weight within the balancing assessments that they must undertake.
Yes, I fully accept that.
And to enable proper scrutiny, Mr. Wright, it's appropriate to include all of the appropriate references so that if people choose, they can go and look at those references and read what you are saying in its proper context.
Yeah, the reasoning why I haven't done that is given in the heritage statement. And if it helps the inquiry to know the background, I think the inquiry will be aware that I've prepared a very large number of these documents over quite a long period, and especially for major developments within Edinburgh's World Heritage Site. So this is essentially, in the past, I have always done introduce those references, but found them in many respects would get in the way of the text of what it is that one is seeking to convey. I can't remember on any occasion that the academic rigour of what had been done in relation to these schemes. I think the last one that I did that had full academic references attached to them would have been the St James Quarter report, a major report done for the development of that part of the city in 2008. From 2010 I haven't been doing that, and it's simply to make the documents more accessible. And I should add that I've never been questioned on in the past. Those documents have always been relied upon as part of the planning process, and never once has there been a query of any point of detail within those documents as being factual or otherwise.
I'm not talking about an academic paper per se, Mr. Wright. I'm talking about the ability of someone reading the document, members of the public to whom you have just referred, but from my perspective, perhaps more importantly, the reporters and ministers, being able to find the document from which you have taken your information. It's all very well for it to be in your head, but unless you write it down, nobody else is going to know about it. So I wonder if we could have a look at CD 197 on page 40, please.
Yes, I have it. Yep.
And if you look above the caption for the picture, below the caption for the picture, you say that the architect recognised, and you're talking there about Hamilton, recognised the particular debt that he owed to start, and quoted from him. And you do a partial quote, and by partial I don't mean anything other than incomplete. ... There is in a bending alignment of streets much beauty. Public buildings break on the eye at the most favourable point of view, showing at once a front and flank. But nowhere do we find the document from which you have taken that source, do we?
No, but I think you will be well aware that that has been responded to in the precognition and in the rebuttal precognition, in the knowledge that the source of that document had been questioned. I'm not the only person to have referred to that. Others have referred to that in other sources as well. So it is something that should have been well known, because it was in the public domain already and should be known to researchers. It should not be something new. The particular article to which it refers is one by Ian Fisher, who is a member of the Royal Commission on the Ancient and Historical Monuments of Scotland, to give it its full title, and it appears in an article which is in the Scottish Georgian Society. I cannot verify Mr. Fisher's sources, but I have quoted and I have provided evidence to the inquiry that that is the source of that particular quotation. And I was relying on that as being factual, as indeed other researchers, when describing Carlton Hill and the Royal High School, have also done the same.
Forgive me, Mr. Wright, but you said a few minutes ago that the reason for your paper not having all of the academic rigour was to enable members of the public to be able to read it and to understand it. Now, I'm a member of the public to all intents and purposes, Mr. Wright. How would I know who was speaking when you don't provide any reference whatsoever for a quotation?
But you will find that there's a bibliography which is at the rear of the document.
Forgive me, but where in the bibliography do I find the quotation so that I can go away and put this quote in its proper context?
You'll find there that there is a paper which is under the heading. It's referred to. I'll point you directly to where it is. It's what I've given evidence to the inquiry already, and in either my precognition or rebuttal precognition. I cannot say exactly which, but I will refer to that if you would like me to do so. But it is certainly there, and it is marked 2/3 of the way down on the first on the first page of the bibliography. I'll give you the page number for that, which is 103, and I'll read it out to the inquiry so there is no doubt as to what the source of that was. It is Fisher, Ian, Thomas Hamilton in the Scottish Georgian Journal, number 11, 1984. It's either on the second or the third page of that, and I do believe that that is one of the documents which is a core document which is here for the inquiry to look at, if it chooses to do so.
Bear with me whilst we find the bibliography a moment.
I think it's worth the inquiry bearing in mind also that this, as I made it clear in the introduction to the heritage statement, that there are documents that have gone before this upon which I'm reliant on the sources for those documents. Those documents also are done to academic standards, so you'll find for which a large number of researchers have been involved in that evidence. I'm entitled to rely on that evidence without starting all over from scratch, which would be highly unusual for a site as complex as this. But also among those researchers are very eminent names, one of which is Mr. Lowry himself, who's involved in the preparation of one of those documents. So I put it to the inquiry. I have very good grounds to rely on the sources of information that come together to create this document.
Could we just go back, please, to page 40 and have that, if we can, open with a thumb open at the bibliography? And can you tell me where on page 40, relative to your quote, I would find any reference to the particular document in the whole host of documents that are included in the bibliography, please?
You will not, for the reasons that I've given the inquiry.
So a member of the public, which is apparently your reason for claiming not to have given academic rigour as you describe it, a member of the public simply would not be able to find your source for that quotation, would they? Because I can't. We don't know.
But I would have hoped that those who are advising you would know, in relation to the importance of this building, what that source was. There are two in the Scottish Georgian Journal. There are two articles there that are attached to one another that run, and again this shows the importance of some of the learned journals of the amenity societies. The Scottish Georgian Society was a trailblazer in that effect. So we have these two important articles by Ian Fisher, followed by one by another author who is well revered and remains well revered, who's Ian Gow, which is on William Playfair. I maintain that I'm entitled to rely on that evidence in putting together this document.
Could you look, please, at page 43 of your document, CD 197? And there we find a caption saying, above and below, detail from a drawing prepared in 1827 showing the retaining walls to the rear of the site, which included the design of the Belvedere Tower, etc., etc. We don't have a footnote. We don't have an endnote. All we have by way of detail from you to enable the reporters and ministers to look at this in any context, and of course the very important public to look at it, is the information prepared in that caption, which is detail from a drawing prepared in 1827. You've not given any information of who did the drawing. You've not given any information there about where we can find it. You've not given any information about whether there was any accompanying text. And you've not given any information about what it did say. Now, I'll appreciate, Mr. Wright, that you will say that this is all in your head and we've all just got to trust that you are entitled to look at it and you know it. But if you don't tell people, Mr. Wright, they don't know it, do they?
Would you like me to tell the inquiry No.
No, that's not appropriate, Mr. Wright, because the evidence that the reporters are allowed to consider is restricted, as I'm sure your team will advise you, to the evidence that is placed before it. And that was your opportunity to advise the reporters then. It is certainly not now. Could you look at page 15 of your document?
Could I respond to that last point? Because I think it is highly significant to what the reporters may take into account in looking at the evidence which is in front of the inquiry.
The point that I'm exploring with you, Mr. Wright, is a lack of references. And that is the question that I'm exploring with you. I've just highlighted that particular occasion to demonstrate that you haven't provided a reference for it. That's all. I'm not looking at the detail of it or your rationale behind it. I'm focusing upon it in the question of a lack of a reference, and that's it. So could we please move to page 15?
Could you please give me the opportunity?
Yeah, I think you need to allow Mr. Wright to answer that last point.
Part of the evidence which is given to this inquiry will be found in documents, and among those documents you will find drawings which are prepared by Thomas Hamilton. These drawings are well known. They're relied upon by a lot of authors in looking at this site. They're relied upon in the conservation plans. They appear in that document. These are not new, and they should not be new to anyone who knows something about this building. Now, if I could refer the reporters, the inquiry, to, I think the reference, my understanding is of the reference is APP-23. And I would ask that document be looked at, if I could. It gives you all the answers to the questions you've put to me, and the reporters need to know as to the source of that and its significance to the matter under discussion. Could I continue and explain to the reporters what this... Do you have the copy in front of you to which I referred? It's APP.
I think I did interject to enable you to answer the point. I think we're looking at sourcing of references and so on, so I'd prefer not to wander off in that direction. We take your point that we see that plan there. If you allow me just a minute or two, Ms. Coburn, you said earlier that up until 2008 or thereabouts it was your practice to reference sources in your heritage impact assessment documents, but that you discontinued that from then on. Are you able to say whether that's just a matter of practice or whether you were following any guidance one way or the other in that respect?
Thank you, sir. I don't think there is any guidance in terms of documents such as this, which are part of the planning system, at least not that I am aware of. Part of it is because these documents have to be written within quite a short period of time, because they relate to an application, and there will be an application date to a proposal which is going forward. And it does require an awful lot of work in terms of putting the references in and to ensure that those references can be traced from throughout the document. But in terms of the World Heritage Site, I would guess that there would have been something like 6 or 7 documents which have been submitted of this type, which have been undertaken in this manner. So in a sense, it's a matter of practice. By me, so yes. So it is a matter of practice that this has been done.
Thanks for that. Ms. Coburn.
Could I just ask a question? We are talking here of a heritage statement, Mr. Wright. We're not talking of a topic paper or directly written evidence to inquiry. What we're talking about is a heritage statement that forms part of an environmental impact assessment. So the purposes, though related, are slightly different. Okay, let's have a look at page 15 and the photographs by Thomas Begbie, again in your heritage statement, which was submitted as part of the application. And you'll see on the left-hand side of the page another caption saying above and right, and then you say at the end of it, it's the final sentence, you say, the profile of the Royal High School was considered at this time, to be inconsequential when seen by this view. And your source for that is these two photographs by Begbie, but there's no information provided about who said that. Is this simply your opinion and interpretation of what was important at that time?
Yes, it is my opinion by looking at hundreds of historic photographs and looking through them in order to present the information in an understandable way. So it's not just based on a single image, it's based on deep research and understanding which goes across a whole series of sources.
Could you have a look, please, at your rebuttal precognition? It's page 4, and it's your comments on Mr. Robb's evidence. You say that you are not alone in the confusion about, as I call it, the missing prison. I take it you're not being alone is not meant to excuse your error.
No, it's to try and make it more understandable. It's not to excuse it. I've made my position quite clear that there was a mistake in interpretation there. But
Okay.
I do draw attention to the fact that the information which is in the heritage statement is correct in that respect. And
Well, I think we'll explore that with you now. Could you go back to your heritage statement, please, Mr. Wright, on page 25? And this is something that we looked at a few minutes ago. It's Miko Kemp's lithograph, and it's going back to exactly the same text that I read before. In other words, it's an artistic license has been used in diminishing the imposing structures at the eastern end of Carlton Jail. There was no jail there at the time that Hamilton was designing the building, was there?
No, there wasn't, but in the evidence that I gave the inquiry in one of the earlier sessions, I did point to the fact that from studying the Begbie photograph, and as you can see in Kemp's image, there were in fact structures which were at the eastern end of the site, and these are clearly shown in terms of the portals can be made out. It sits at the right-hand side of the Bridewell section, which is the middle section, the middle jail. And then you have the Governor's House, which is shown very clearly to the left of that image. But to the right of that, at the extreme of the site, you see what remained in the 1880s still as the full extent of the enclosing walls that circled the jail buildings.
But the structures at the end are real structures. We're not talking about artistic license, are we?
No, they exist, yes.
Now, if you look at page 88 on page 4, and just whilst you're turning to that, there is no artistic license if something exists, isn't there?
It's a very interesting point, because if you look at I know that this evidence is not in front of the inquiry, but...
Well, then we can't talk about it.
Well, I think where we can talk about it relates
Well, no,
to...
we can't, Mr. Wright. If it's not evidence that is before the inquiry as a matter of law, we can't talk about it. If you want to produce it and produce it late, then all that we'll do is we'll look at it later and we'll consider it. But as a matter of law, you can't talk about evidence that's not before the inquiry.
What I can talk about in response to your question is the degree to which Victorian commercial photographers, of which we have evidence within the heritage statement, would often doctor and cut out because they were starting from the view of the picturesque of what it was that they were selling and which was popular. And there are many images of Edinburgh, and including those from the castle, where certain elements within the scene have been airbrushed out. And that's exactly the same with Thomas Begbie. In the photographs to which we're referring, which include the jail, in one of those photographs, the 400-foot high gasworks chimney has been airbrushed out. So you have to interpret photographs with a degree of knowledge and understanding in order to get the. But I would accept generally that photograph with that proviso that photographs don't lie.
But really, what we're saying here, Mr. Wright, isn't it, is that your analysis, as you have portrayed it in that caption, demonstrates that you think that the jail exists.
Yes, I accept that it was a misunderstanding that I believe the jail existed there. Yeah.
And I don't think there's any quibble between us, Mr. Wright, in that Meikle-Kemp's lithograph is an accurate portrayal of what existed at that time.
Yes, although the time when it was actually portrayed is maybe something in question. That some sources suggest it is closer to 1830, and this is a reproduction of something which came out of the lithograph in 1845. And why that is critical is because that is the time when the Eastern Jail started to be constructed in the evidence which Mr. Robb has supplied to the inquiry.
Could we turn to page 88? And there's a series of paragraphs that aren't numbered, but it's the paragraph, it's the third complete paragraph that starts Thomas Hamilton's contribution, and it's the final sentence of that paragraph that we're looking at, because you say there that in preparing his designs, the architect was fully aware of the plan for the National Monument, and when composing the design for the Royal High School, he took into account the monumental citadel of the Carlton Jail, and as a foil to them both, which he studiously chose to avoid in his own imagery. So, if something didn't exist at that time, he wasn't studiously choosing to ignore it, was he?
I would point to the evidence in the heritage statement that suggested that he was, and indeed all the other artists. The jail was essentially, it doesn't fit well, and I think Mr. Lowry's paper, which is part of the evidence of this inquiry, does cover that point particularly well. It's dealing with your houses of correction are not things that you necessarily want to be proud about, and something which is on that site you need it gets transformed into something which gives this impression of being a Gothic citadel and upon which visitors would comment. So it's designed in a certain way which gives it that picturesque form, which takes away from the rather sordid connection with what was going on inside with the exercise yards and the way in which prisons were designed as panopticons and how the central view would look towards these things, and the exercise yards are all hidden behind the jail walls. They're all part of the, if you like, the disconnect between correction and improvement which is going on and then what is going on in Carlton Hill. And I think that is an important consideration to take into account, which the form of the jail buildings are material to considering how Hamilton positioned his buildings in relation to that. And it is quite clear from the perspectives that the portals which existed, certainly at the time, and which we have established, and which I accept, were hidden behind from this imaginary viewpoint, and if you look at that information you'll find it. It's not something where suddenly all of this starts to tower above the setting. It's something which is suppressed within the perfect picturesque imagery that was being portrayed.
Might I ask a simple question to get, I hope, a relatively simple answer, but why would anybody, Hamilton in particular, studiously avoid something in a drawing when the thing that he was apparently studiously avoiding simply did not exist?
But it did exist. It existed in the forms of the encircling walls, which, as I show in relation to the Begbie photograph, were there. They were designed by Archibald Elliott, as part of the encircling site. It didn't have, at the time of designing the building, a jail building within it. But as I've also given them my evidence to the inquiry so far, there are maps that show clearly that there was going to be a jail put in that position. I think it's entirely reasonable that he would take it into account, that his positioning of the Royal High School would take best advantage of that. And it was certainly the case, and I don't think there's much disagreement on that, that when Brown's jail, which came in, which was of much larger proportions than anything that had been proposed before, intervened with the views that you had of Thomas Hamilton's building. So it was always seen to be coalescing, and it was always fighting for its location, right teetering on the edge of Carlton Hill, which gives us its prominence, which helps explain why it is pushed forward on the site to give it that prominence, and that gives us an understanding as to why he positioned it in that way.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. You'll be pleased to hear that I have no further questions because, of course, Mr. Lowry will explain all of this in his evidence in chief. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks for that, Ms. Coburn. Mr. McIntosh.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Wright, I have some documents it would be helpful if you could have to hand. Firstly, as before, all 6 of your reports, your inquiry report, your precognition and your rebuttal precognition, and just to start off with, CD 39.
All right, that was very quick, Mr. McIntosh.
So, CD 197, 198, 199.
Yeah, that's the 6 reports.
Yes.
I got that, but I got
CD
lost.
39.
CD 39.
The inquiry report. The precognition, rebuttal precognition, just for the moment. I'm sure there'll be more, but I'll try and give them in blocks as we go along. So, Mr. Wright, whilst those are being brought for you, I just explain perhaps the approach I'm taking in cross-examination in order to save time. You'll be aware of the position taken by those instructing me, and that Dr. McGee disagrees with you about certain aspects of the history of Carlton Hill and how to interpret it. Now, to a certain extent, those issues have been dealt with by Miss Coburn, and I'm going to try and avoid going over old ground, and I hope that you and Mr. Steele will not take if I miss out some small aspect that we actually suddenly agree. I'm also not going to discuss the merits of the music school proposals, and I'll leave those to Mr. Innes, and there will be therefore little gaps that will appear as we go along. But of course there are 2 schemes, and 2 schemes unfortunately has mean a lot more words, so it may take more time, unfortunately. Could we start by reference in your rebuttal precognition at page 10 to the Kerr report in 1904? So this is on page 2, not page 2 at all, page 10, paragraph, or the paragraph is numbered 2,6. So I'm not going to take you to the Kerr report, but I'm just going to ask to see if you'll accept the reason that we've mentioned it.
Could I check with you so that it's page 10?
Paragraph 2-6, 6. Having read the report is your first line. So you're aware that Mr. Kerr produced the report for the Royal High School Club? You're aware that Mr. Kerr produced the report for the Royal High School Club?
I'm not aware of that document.
It's one of... You provided a footnote to it, footnote 43?
If that is the same document to which you're referring, then I am aware of that. My understanding it was prepared for the galleries on positioning a new gallery in that location.
Well, I hope it's not necessary to go to it. Let me explain what I'm trying to say and see if you'll accept it. It was prepared, according to the document, for the Royal Edinburgh Club, and it was a document that the Coburn Council considered in reaching its view that Mr. Leventhal mentions. All I was to take from you is that the only reason Mr. Leventhal is mentioning it is to point out that the Coburn Association has been concerned about this building for an awfully long time. Would you accept that?
Yes, I accept that.
I'd like to move on to Mr. Leventhal's recognition. Sorry, I should have mentioned this before. This is on, it's a short document, and I'm looking at page 6. They aren't numbered, and that's entirely my fault. Mr. Wright, if we can work through the pages looking at the top of each page. The first page of text is headed Introduction. The second, the Coburn stands by those objections. The third has as a major heading Chapter 2. The fourth is headed Chapter 3. And it's over that page, the one headed Rugged Landscape of Carlton Hill.
Sorry, is it therefore the page 5, Rugged Landscape of Carlton Hill, that we're looking at?
Yes, Mr. Steele.
Okay.
Now, the fourth paragraph, which begins, "For reasons that only," in it, Mr. Leventhal says that for reasons that only make sense if the appellants are only persisting in Scheme 1 in order to keep their, quote, option over the site with CEC alive, the reporters and Scottish ministers will have to consider the interplay between Scheme 1 and Scheme 2. And in your rebuttal precognition, you reject that. You say it's incorrect. Is that correct?
Could you allow me to check that? Yeah.
I think you'll find it on page 10, Mr. Wright.
That's presumably page 10 of the rebuttal, is it?
Absolutely, Mr. Steele.
It may assist if you draw attention to the paragraph number that you're concerned
Certainly,
with.
Mr. Steele. Paragraph P, 4 on page 10 of your rebuttal precognition. You have that.
It's P6, 4, isn't it?
6,4. Now, all I want to put to you is that you've never seen, I'm assuming, the option, the lease, or the contract heads of terms for this transaction with the council.
Can I just check with you, sir, that it is the paragraph that begins, "The appellants have sought to argue"?
No. Page 10 of your rebuttal precognition, paragraph P6, 4, the paragraph that begins, "I consider the statement."
I think so. We're at cross purposes. It's not the clause to which I refer. The clause that I refer, and this is just perhaps a problem of the not having numbers to the pages, which I'm having to ascribe numbers in order to give a response. My page 6, just to make it clear, is that begins 14, 15 and 64 of the 1997 Act, and hence my response and my statement that something is incorrect relates to the paragraph that begins, the appellants have sought to argue that the exceptions.
That is precisely why I asked earlier if it was page 5 that we were looking at, rather than, as my learned friend said, page 6, because there's a complete disconnect in this. I think my learned friend...
I will return to that little topic at the very end, which I suspect will come after a break. That's the best thing, I think, to do there. Let's move on. So, you were instructed as a heritage consultant for this scheme in May 2014.
That's correct, yeah.
And you were first approached by the late Mr. Hoskins in the spring of 2014.
No, without referring to it directly, I think he said he contacted me beforehand, and that might have been a telephone call. It could have taken place 4 months beforehand, but I know that it wasn't at around that time. It wasn't a succession of events. It was something where he knew enough, I can only suggest the inquiry, that something major was going to happen on the scheme, and that he knew from the work we'd done before that he would be looking to nominate someone who could help him on the matter of preparing heritage consultancy work as part of the planning system. So that there was, it's true that it was Mr. Hoskins who contacted me. Yes.
That's helpful. So you've covered a few of my questions already. So effectively he teed you up earlier, and then in late May of 2014 you were actually formally instructed after the first workshop.
Yes, he got in touch with me again at around the time you're suggesting, saying that he was going to make that recommendation to his client. And it was after that point that I met the client, and then a formal agreement was reached as to the scope of the work and its duration, and the knowledge that it related to the design workshop sessions which were planned for 2014.
Thank you. And he wanted your help to evaluate his scheme for a hotel of international standing on the site.
When he first contacted me, I didn't know that it was going to be for international standing. I knew that he was undertaking a hotel project on that site. That's as much as the information I had. The information about the brief came out more clearly to me during the course of the workshops.
And you've said in your inquiry report, and if you're looking to find it, it's paragraph 4.1 of your inquiry report. You have that. So this is the third line of 4.1. The sentence in the middle begins, he wished to gauge my appetite for assisting with the task of evaluating the emerging scheme proposals for a new international hotel, the former Royal High School, in conjunction with the workshop process that was being planned, in order to establish the likelihood of the scheme gaining support by the end of the workshop phase. And that's a fair description, as you understand it, of what you were asked to do.
This is consistent with the advice I gave. My understanding is on the second time that he contacted me that he would have made that apparent.
That's been the vision of the... I'll just let the IT department here just move out of their way. And that's been the vision of your clients consistently throughout the period since you had that first interaction with Mr. Hoskins.
I would agree with that.
Now, are you aware that earlier work took place involving this site and these architects as early as the summer of 2009?
I cannot say that I was, nor that that was referred to in the initial approach from Mr. Hoskins. I knew that it was an ongoing process that he was engaged in that was likely to be escalated in the near future. That was my understanding of it.
Would you have EW18 before you, which is in the Coalition's bundle of documents? It is the first copy of the September 2009 exhibition or presentation set from Hoskins Architects. Now, I'm not going to take you to your inquiry report for a bit, so you might want to take that extra folder off your desk. I realise it's a very small folder. As part of your preparation for the inquiry, have you looked at this document before and found out and sense where it comes from and how it comes to be lodged?
In terms of EW18s?
Yes.
Yes, I'm aware clearly that the Edinburgh World Heritage Trust would be lodging something which related to communications between the parties that goes back to that early stage of the process.
There will be evidence, in fact there is written evidence, that this document was the copy of the presentation by Hoskins, Gareth Hoskins & Co. In September 2009 that was given to the World Heritage Trust by its late chairman some months before he died. And I wanted to take you firstly to the first page, and you'll see the first page comprises notes in, I'm told, Mr. McKean's handwriting. And do you see that under the section disadvantages, that's 9 lines down the page, at number 2, someone has written too close, too high.
Yes, I see that.
Yeah, and do you see that just across to the left, someone in the same handwriting has written should be below cornice?
It's below his reference to the maison cave.
Indeed. And if we go on past some blank pages, perhaps I'll take you to some pages and then we'll talk about them. So if you could perhaps turn to page 5 first. The pages actually appear at the bottom of the photocopies in the right hand corner. It's the page with a picture of a rather bright and swirly carpet with some odd chairs on it.
Could you give me the page number again, sorry?
Page 5.
Page 5, thank you.
I thought I would just see if you I want to ask you 2 questions about the last 2 paragraphs. They are: the former Royal High School building is seen as a piece of creative art in its own right, and is synonymous with Edinburgh, the classical city, as well as being locationally perfect. City centre yet aloof, the building provides a unique panorama over the city skyline of Holyrood Park. It is a powerful building visually and represents the opportunity for a powerful brand, an inspiring arts hotel for the nation. And then the last paragraph: it's also a building that can support new building interventions externally as well as the best of contemporary interior design. We see both as an exercise in creative design which demonstrates how the city's heritage can look forward through high quality contemporary architecture to produce a classic of modern times. The solution posed is bold and imaginative and could become an exemplar project for Edinburgh, how Edinburgh wishes to address its heritage successfully. Now, passing over the fact that I always cringe when anyone uses the word exemplar, would you accept that those 2 paragraphs, broadly speaking, sum up the aspirations of your clients as expressed since you were first instructed?
I would agree with that.
Page 10, please. This page is heading Appreciation of the Building. Now, earlier on in your inquiry reports, you've observed that Hoskins Architecture corporately, and I'm sure I can ask Mr. Gibb about this in detail, carried out historical researches before you were instructed. Is that correct?
I believe it was correct on the basis of the evidence which was placed in front of all those participating in the design workshops in 2014. There's no hint that at that time there was no research had been done. I think the workshop started very rapidly with a level of understanding which had been in part because there had been 2 conservation plans also prepared for the hill and for the site itself, so this wasn't starting from scratch.
I understand that. And so let's look at the 3rd paragraph. I'll read it out. The building is approached end-on from the west and provides limited opportunities for appreciating the entirety of the built form due to the linear nature of the site on which it sits. The rear northern elevation is less well composed than the signature southern elevation, and pedestrian access into the building is not readily apparent. Would you agree with that, those observations by Hoskins corporately in this document?
No, I wouldn't agree with them now, given the thoroughness of the research and understanding that I've carried out of the site.
So, if I'm thinking of what you've already said, you would now disagree with the elements about the northern elevation particularly?
I think in possibly more than that. I think what is being referred to here is the inaccessibility of the building from Regent Road, and we know that this was a particular interest of the architect, but also in terms of the requirement of the Block 10 brief, which, as with every brief for Princes Street and its connected parts that's being prepared by the city at the time, there was this interconnectivity between access to sites, going through sites, permeability, and on beyond that. So I think it reflects some of what was in the Block 10 brief also at that time. So it wouldn't surprise me that that might appear at this early stage in the process.
And given that the Block 10 brief is the closest we have to a development brief from the planning authority, that wouldn't be surprising, would it?
No, it wouldn't be wholly surprising. No.
As we could turn to page 11. And this is called Appreciation of the Wider Setting.
Yeah, there's just noises going on behind, but I do have it, sir. But could I ask, just so that I understand this and the inquiry understands it's true, I've never seen this document before, and that might be a disadvantage, clearly, that I should have seen it. But could you give me the date of this? I think it would help within the overall time frame of things, so that I can consider the answers accordingly.
Of course. From what I understand from reading Mr. Hoskins's evidence and Mr. Mappin's evidence, in the summer of 2009, your clients lodged an application as part of a procurement exercise, and this was one of their bid documents in a series of workshops that took place somewhere in the economic development property selling part of the council.
Thank you very much for explaining that. Thank you.
At the bottom of the introduction, it's got a date of September 2009.
It does indeed, Mr. On, and indeed that's the date at the top of the first page that we looked at originally. If I just want to just take you through this larger paragraph on page 11, the one that begins the primary approach. And it says the primary approach to the site is from the west along Waterloo Place, which gives limited appreciation of the scale and composition of the complex. And I'm assuming from your earlier answer that you would say that you no longer agree with that because of your researches.
Yes, that would be true.
But yet again, that sentence would be consistent with the sort of language being used in the Block 10 development brief and the String of Pearls project.
My understanding is that it would be consistent with that.
If we could just move on to the end of that big paragraph after the list of views, and this is not the time to talk about views. The sentence that begins, "The height of new elements of our proposals will be restricted to below the ridge height of the wings to the main pavilion to preserve the importance of the main complex." Now, let's get some phraseology correct. If we look down further on the page, you'll see there is a handy picture of the rather bad quality picture of the Royal High School. And in the centre we have the temple with a pitched roof, which you can see reflected. And then there are the two angled small pavilions, I think we've been calling them. I'm assuming that the wings in that sentence are the squarer wings at the ends of the colonnades. Would that be your understanding of that sentence?
I think that is quite reasonable, yeah.
So whatever was going on before you were instructed in 2009, the appellants were thinking of restricting the height of their proposals to below the wings of each of the pavilions of the main building. Is that correct?
And what I understand to have been the proposals at that time are illustrated in Part 3 of the Heritage Report as part of the narrative of how the design had evolved over the period of time. It'll be in section, I think it is section 4. I'm not sure we need to refer to that, but it's
very easy. Let's go to page 16. There's a nice picture. The page is heading Description of Proposal, and the image is headed 1 Massing Study. Do you have page 16 of EW18? We were just looking at it.
Yes, I do. The image that I was referring to is specifically the one on page 13, which predates my involvement, just to continue the narrative that we had earlier, so there's no doubt about that.
This is page 13 of a different document. I'm looking at page 16 of EW18, Mr. Wright. I know there are other images. I'm going to come to them in a moment. I just want you to look at page 16 of EW18.
I understand that. When you asked me to do that, you said, let's go straight to that document, which I assume to be the heritage statement.
No, I meant let's go straight to page 16 of EW18.
I have it, yes.
Thank you. Now, all I suppose want simply to look at that, and we can see that whatever's going on with these flanking buildings, they are, broadly speaking, at or below or slightly above the top of these wings of the main building.
It would approximate to the cornice level, the height of the cornice level of the wings. I would agree with that.
We shouldn't add any more precision than that. Could you put EW18 to one side and go back to your third report? That's CD 199. That's the Heritage Impact Assessment.
Sir, I'm wondering whether this might be an appropriate place, time even,
it would
to
be
break
a very
for
good
coffee,
point,
and we will undertake to see if we can stop that intriguing noise, which frankly is pretty distracting.
I agree. Let's break until 11:30.
I had a phone call. I think we're told that it will stop soon. Maybe it stopped right now, but it was going a moment ago.
Perfect. Thanks for that. And in everyone's absence, Mr. Wright has also been provided with a bigger table, so he should be a little more comfortable. Yes. Okay, Mr. McIntosh.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Wright, I was asking you to look at your HIA report for Scheme 2, that's document CD199, and I'd like to go to page 13, please.
Yes, I have it.
Thank you. Now, what I thought I'd do is I'd set out what I think you're saying here and then ask you a couple of questions. So, at paragraph 4.24, you seem to be addressing a letter from the Edinburgh World Heritage Trust to the Council on the 1st of June 2010. And for the reporter's benefit, this letter can be found in CD191. I don't think you'll need to look at this, Mr. Wright, but we'll see. In CD191, which is the appendices to the Design and Access Statement at page 135. It's very much... Now, all I wanted to check with you, Mr. Wright, was you provided a commentary on this letter as you understood it. And you've accepted that you weren't aware of what the original schemes were from the developers in 2009. Is that correct?
I think the answer that I gave you in response to that was at the time of the appointment, which is materially different.
Thank you. So since then you've acquired some knowledge.
Yes, that knowledge was acquired later during the process of assimilation, and having requested this piece of knowledge in order to be able to write the heritage impact assessment in an appropriate way to try and cover what I understood to have been the changes in terms of the advice that had been given to the applicants at the earlier stage. So it's simply trying to bring these considerations into account to give some sort of narrative that tried to make sense of the design changes that might have followed on from that.
Thank you. And that presumably is why you've included a preliminary concept sketch, brackets 2009, in that paragraph.
Yes, it was for that reason alone, to set the scene for trying to identify where changes were made and the sequence of those changes.
And yet whoever told you about the 2009-2010 process didn't show you a copy of the document we've just looked at and the proposal that was put to the people in procurement in the council.
No, I hadn't seen that in any detail, no.
And you won't know what Adam Wilkinson, the initials are a problem in this game. Adam Wilkinson in the Edinburgh World Heritage told the principals in DHP and told Gareth Hoskins in 2009-10, will you?
I can't say for certain that I wouldn't have seen some of the... If it is in formal letters of response that are exchanged at that time, then it is likely I will have seen them.
If, as Mr. Wilkinson has explained, it's conversations taking place some on the hill and on the site with Mr. Hoskins and Mr. Hare about how the approach from the west was important, and as important as the view from the south, or that the appellants were proposing too much development from the site, you wouldn't necessarily have been seeing that if it's not in written form.
No, I'm not aware of those discussions now.
So you can't help the reporters understand the context of that letter in the context of that information, can you?
No, not fully, other than being aware of the letter and interpreting it within the context of what followed thereafter. Yeah.
Let's look at what followed thereafter. Let's look at the 2014 workshops. Now, I think we won't need to refer to any documents for this, because I suspect we've covered all documents already. But I wanted to start off with, there were a series of workshops. I think there are 7, according to Mr. Gibb. There are 4, including the developer statement, but let's assume there were quite a few workshops, and you weren't at the first one.
I thought at the time I wasn't at the first one, but looking back at the record, I suspect that I was, looking at the dates when the workshops took place. If that sounds confusing, it's just that I'm entering into something that had been set up for the first time with an appointment only just having been made, arriving on the scene of the Royal High School and being thrust into this. So I had assumed at the time that I could come into the second workshop, but I don't believe that that is the case now, looking back at the record.
Well, that's different from what you said in your inquiry report, but that may not matter. Perhaps if you could tell me, what do you recollect the first workshop you attended being about?
I have no direct recollection. It may have been, I would imagine that if that being the first workshop, it would be covering the ground of understanding of the site and setting out what there are always presentations, normally of quite a high standard, which were done to those who were there at the time. So it would be sufficient to get the workshops running.
So the process involved a series of workshops and a series of options being discussed. Is that a fair description of what was going on over the workshops?
Yes, that's correct, yes.
I'm afraid we're going to have to look at some of the documents, and the two I'd like to focus on, and I hope they're the right ones, is CD3 and CD7, which we've looked at before. Start with CD3 and have CD7 to hand. Could you turn to page 10 of CD3? Now, this I think you were shown by Mr. Mackay.
Yes, I recognise that.
And if we take it in summary, and I'm sure you wouldn't adopt this phraseology, but just in summary, option A involves squashing down on the building on the western playground and something rather large and monolithic-like appears in the east. Option B involves something which I think that must be Rankin Fraser, has decided is best illustrated by a pink blob with exclamation marks around it, and a not too huge building on the east. And option C looks distinctly similar to options we keep seeing later on in the process. Is that a fair read? No, is that broadly as you understand it without the adjectives? I won't ask you to sign up to those.
Yes, the pink blob might be interpreted as an atomic bang at that point.
Indeed. The other document to look at is document 7, which contains a series of options. Again, you looked at them with Mr. Mackay, so we can go through them relatively quickly, and they seem to be option A. If one turns over the pages, you've got a big version of that, or an A. Is your version? It's A4.
It's A4. Yes.
Right. Well, you should have a series of pages headed option A, B, and C with interposing maps or landscapes. My question is simply this. If you look at these two documents, both of which seem to have 3 options, I'm conscious from Mr. Gibbs' inquiry report that he mentions there were 5 at one point. And because I don't want to be accused of missing people out, and you were at the workshops, do you have any recollection of what the other 2 were?
Gosh, there must have been 75 options that were put forward that changed from one workshop to the other in response to the discussions that were going on. So it was very much an iterative process. So I don't remember there being just 5 options. I think these 5 options or 3 options, I think, would have been distilled. I can only assume, again, without knowing the context of this, that these would have been exhibition boards prepared for a public consultation exercise, if you could help me with that.
I think they are exhibition boards, but I'll ask Mr. Gibb in more detail. But perhaps I can simply limit it to this. I'm told that throughout the process of the workshops, whenever Mr. Wilkinson expressed the view that there was too much development being proposed for the site's capacity, that wasn't responded to by producing options for less quantum of development, and therefore all the options were looking at broadly 150-bed hotels. Is that fair?
I don't think it is fair. It's not my understanding of how the exercise was conducted. I think there were slotted in at various times options that looked at a reduced number of bedrooms. I'm sure Mr. Gibb will be able to give more expert evidence to the inquiry than I can on that.
You told the inquiry 2 days ago that optimally there should be no development on the western playground, but it was required in order to, I think there was a description about enable, to make possible the saving of the building. Do you remember that?
I think I may have said that it is in the context of absolutely no building at any point on the site would be the optimum arrangement.
Given that you have that view, would you not have seized upon any option that involved less development, particularly on the western playground, as a positive in any workshop?
These things are always a balance that have to be taken into account, and which must consider the wider context and also the history of the site and the setting of the building within the wider townscape.
But as I said, your view is that the optimum would be no development on the site other than the existing building.
Yes, that would be a starting point, would be to have some sort of scheme that would result in that without any change whatsoever. And that is in the background, of course, of the context of a building that has had no use for 50 years or so, or no beneficial use for that period of time.
And therefore a building, there are costs in restoring a building like this and operating into the future that have to be to a certain extent paid for.
Yes, that's correct. It has to be sustainable so that there is no long-term risk to the listed building or buildings which are on the site.
Perhaps can you help me why it is that in 2009 your clients were proposing a 159-bed hotel on this site, and they have consistently, until refused planning permission for Scheme 1, proposed hotels of that scale, and have never proposed anything smaller. And there are no schemes in all the documents we have for anything smaller than that until Scheme 2 comes along. Can you explain why that is?
I'm not the person to answer that, I'm afraid. I don't have the knowledge of the way that the brief was put together, nor of that background to it.
But Mr. Wright, you're a heritage architect who doesn't want to see any development on the western playground. Surely you would have pushed for such a solution.
I'm a heritage architect or consultant and a conservation architect who was prepared to look, which is what the purpose of the exercise was of the design workshops, as to what level of development might be acceptable on the western playground which would not have an impact which would be adverse on the principal listed building. That was the purpose of the exercise. There were some discussions, I think, to which I would refer the inquiry during that process that began to look at that exercise, but it never came to any conclusion, as I've said in my inquiry report. And I think it's fundamental to understanding the outturn of this process, and it comes back to the 7 points which are set down by Mr. Leslie in the advice to the architects at the end of the process. And in terms of the massing studies which were prepared by Mr. Given at the beginning of 2016, all of these considerations are material which accept that some form of development within the western playground would be appropriate. It's very clear from that advice that that was the position reached.
But despite all that, there is no proposal from the appellants in the documents lodged by this inquiry or with the council for any development of less than approximately 150 hotel bedrooms, with less development in the western playground and no monolith in the east. That simply isn't here. We haven't got it. It may well have existed, but we haven't got it.
No, but it was undertaken during the workshop process, and I'm sure that Mr. Gibb will be able to give concise evidence on that to the inquiry. But I think what the question you put to me, I think the assertion, excuse me, was that you said to me that there was nothing that is put in front of the inquiry which is less than 150 bedrooms. That is not the case. Scheme 2 is for a lesser sum.
Absolutely, but my assertion was until Scheme 1 was refused, and of course, that, as I understand, is correct. I'm sure we'll have an argument later whether any additional evidence that can be lodged by the appellant showing they considered other schemes and rejected them, but we'll deal with that later. Let's move on to the substance, as it were, if we haven't touched on that already. Perhaps if you could have, I find my note of all the documents, perhaps if you could have to hand CD 485, that's the new one with all the pages, CD 622 and CD 624. Right, perhaps we can start off with something that we might agree about. Carlton Hill. You said yesterday that Carlton Hill is a wide area, and so perhaps for completeness, in the absence of a statement of agreed matters, we could agree, or get you to explain what Carlton Hill comprises, in your mind. And so it's wider than the area in the 1999 L&DN Carlton Hill Management Plan assessment, isn't it?
Yes, I would agree with that, yes.
And it includes the main building, St Andrew's House, and the Robert Burns Monument.
Yes, and I would consider it also includes Regent's Terrace as well as part of the Carlton scheme. That would be my understanding of Carlton Hill. And my understanding is it's the eminence which comes from the volcanic crag and tail topography is the start point, and it's really what has survived of that and how it has been changed by the hand of man.
Thank you. So it would include, for example, the new Carlton burying ground and even the gardener's cottage down on the north face towards Hillside, London Road.
Yes, within the, obviously we could go on with this exercise, which would take the other parts of the Carlton scheme, which would take us on the north side, which isn't visible from the site. So I'm really looking at trying to perceive it, at least from the point of viewpoints from which the site will be seen from around the city. And I think that is consistent with the approach taken with CEC, that while there are elements of the skyline study that where Carlton Hill will be visible, the site itself, within the context of the site, would not be relevant within those views. So there is an arc of view that would be which would be considered that would define what is important about the hill.
But that, just to conclude, that wider Carlton Hill in your mind is the part of the fourth new town that we're talking about when we talk about the landscape and the setting and the context of this building and the surrounding listed buildings. Is that broadly fair?
Yes, and skirted at the base of the hill by Low Carlton in various forms that it had in terms of its relationship with the hill which comes down. It is not simply the upper terrace. What I'm tending to look at is really the whole of the hill, and then how any development sits within that much broader context.
And that would, of course, include Jacob's Ladder and the terrace.
Yes, it would include. It would have to include that, and then obviously there would be a focus on the more precise site, so that when dealing with direct impacts or indirect impacts, those are very clearly understood as to how they relate to the site and the setting of the listed building.
Thank you. Now let's move on to CD 485, the nomination document for the Old and New Towns of Edinburgh World Heritage Site. Now, Mr. Mackay dealt with the significance of this document, and you explained to him why you hadn't included it in your heritage statements. And it's not a core document provided by the appellants. Let's go to page 3. The coloured map. The pages and the number at the bottom. And it's electronic page 7, if anyone's looking at it.
Yes, I have it, yes.
And it's... there's the quote within it from Henry Russell Hitchcock. And we've discussed how Edinburgh is seen as the Athens of the North, and that's part of the city's identity to the extent that it is seen as that. Is that correct?
Yes, and I've concur with that, and the heritage statement also takes up that view also.
So in a sense, it's a non-landscape attribute of the city, so it's more than just a view, it's an idea in people's heads.
Yes, exactly.
And then others have taken you to various sections in here, but the point that I wanted to draw out was in the reference to the 4th new town, which comes over the page on page 6, I think, 7 in fact. It's in the middle of the page. And you'd accept that the references to the way the 4th new town exploits contours, views and trees in a romantic manner is an inherent part of the 4th new town and how it works and what we should take from it.
Sorry, so could you give me the page number that you...
Page 7, electronic page 11. And there's a line that begins the 4th new town, and it is 1, 2, 3, 4th paragraph down, half the page. And it reads, the 4th new town, laid out and around in the east of Carlton Hill, was designed by Stark's pupil William Henry Playfair from 1819 onwards for a consortium of proprietors which include the city of Edinburgh itself. It followed the lines that Stark had suggested in his report of 1813 on the plans originally submitted. Its defining characteristics is that instead of imposing a gridiron upon the landscape, the buildings exploit the contours, views and trees in a romantic manner. And then if we move on past the mention to Leith, its principal characteristic is the linear development from the majestic processional entrance of Waterloo Place and the Royal High School building extending around the hill along Regent Terrace, Carlton Terrace and Royal Terrace. And then there's a reference to Royal Terrace, and in the last 2 lines it observes that it rivals St. Petersburg and the Nash's Regent Park terraces in London. Of course, they were made in stucco and fell down rather faster, but surpassing them in being executed entirely in solid stone rather than stucco. So the question I want to ask from that is, I know you have your own interpretation of how Waterloo Place is to be read, and I don't want to go back into which side of the road you need to stand to understand that, because I think done. But do you accept that if you read from this that there is a processional entrance on this route, that's a different interpretation of how the road works than you have?
I don't think it is, and I can point you to parts of the heritage statement where my understanding aligns with this. I think there's no doubt about that in my mind.
But if we can go back to cultural rather than landscape attributes, so ideas rather than views, if you're an 18th century schoolboy or his father, and you walk up Waterloo Place, and on either side of the road, it perhaps isn't important, you walk on the jail side where all the criminals are, or the hillside where the nice terraces are, but anyway, you walk along, and you go past that landscape, and you have Carlton Hill to your left, and the wall to your right, and you get to the Royal High School. There is an idea behind that. You're making a journey, and not just a physical one. That's not correct. Correct?
Yes, absolutely. And once again, this is a matter which is addressed within the heritage statement, and to which I have already given evidence to the inquiry.
You have, and I'm moving on to one key point. So the cultural meanings here are about boys heading to school to learn Greek and become classical men. And it's about the gateway to becoming a citizen of significance. It's that idea of a school as part of the city and part of the civic heart of the city.
Yes, I don't agree with that. Sorry, I do. I do agree with that. But the Stevenson's Road is rather more than just boys walking past the jail to go to school. It's actually much more than that, and it's also to do with the pleasure to be had from which may determine which side of the road you go on in order to get to the view or make that choice. I really don't want to be facetious here about going up Carlton Hill Drive as it's been reconfigured, or to that critical point in the landscape where you get this stunning view of the old town and across to the Salisbury Crags and equally back in the other direction to the old town, and I think that comes out strongly within the heritage statement as something that really matters in describing. So I'm in agreement with that.
Come along Waterloo Place, whether in reality or in your mind, and there is a gradual reveal of a mountain, of a volcano, of the old town, of Holyrood Palace, of the Royal High School, and it's the ultimate picturesque way of leaving a city, isn't it?
Yes, it's a very high townscape value, and I also draw attention to that and recognise that in the heritage statement.
An argument that may turn out to be nothing at all, but in your rebuttal precognition, and I'm hoping again I'm not referring to the wrong paragraph, but we shall see, at page 9 of your rebuttal precognition, you suggest that in some way you have a disagreement with Mr. Wilkinson about whether the Royal High School is a temple.
Could you give me the paragraph?
Yes, I'm now trying to find it in my... I'm looking at the right document for the question. Yes, sir. Page 9. The former high school building is not a freestanding temple. Its purpose had been for a school, which it reflected strongly its architectural form and layout.
That's correct, yes.
Now, are we delving too deeply into meaning here, is what I'm trying to check. Could you explain why it's not a freestanding temple? And maybe we simply have the wrong end of the stick, but I'd be grateful to have your explanation.
If I could point out the end of the stick in relation to how I see this as opposed to the other end of the stick, which is what Mr. Wilkinson may perceive. And this, my understanding of this is that it is designed very clearly as an institutional building. It is quite different in appearance and in scale and its prominence in relation to the setting, that's its site, when compared with Regent Terrace. So it is a building that has different qualities, and I don't think anyone is disagreeing on that particular point. But in a sense also, I think what is being applied here is a notion of what is, and I think it comes out quite clearly in Mr. Wilkinson's evidence when he refers to the gate lodge as a tempietto. The tempietto has a particular meaning in Italian Renaissance architecture, and I could give you examples of tempiettos that actually might mean that might have that particular definition. But this is quite a large. We've agreed it's not huge because it is given this prominence on the hill and given its sense of monumentality. But in essence, this is no more than a continuing classical tradition of something which is dressed up in Greek revival clothing in a very convincing way. This is the genius of Hamilton. When compared with something, and if we go back to Inigo Jones and his Queen's House of 1626 at Greenwich, I may be wrong with the date, but it's round about that time, this will give you an indication of a building which has, say, a centre part. and then there will be wings to either side. So it is a symmetrical composition in which something like a portico, not a temple in that case, it's something which is stuck on the front of the building. I'm sorry if this is sort of being rather pedantic about things, but I think it is really important because it is the difference of something between a temple. It then goes on to Palladianism that comes out from the same sources that Inigo Jones will be using, and looking at the Palladian tradition, which then comes into the Georgian country house tradition, where you get these similar buildings which may be within country landscapes, or they may be part of the townscape coming into the fore. Now that, to me, these are buildings with different faces rather than having something which is a perfect form that takes us back to that tempietta or something which is the temple form. It uses temple forms. There are three different temples being assembled here to give it that particular form. It still has that degree of monumentality, but it also has a boundary, and the boundary is very marked because the boundary relates to the kidney shapes of the playgrounds that sit in a very distinct way, that define those playgrounds and which bend around the site, which also adds to the setting of the building. It also relates in a series of planes in terms of horizontality and with railings to Regent Road. And that is very obviously something which is part of that design. It's for that reason that primarily, I would not put this with the same level of architectural understanding as a temple in relation to, say, for example, the Burns Monument, which is on the opposite side, which is on the rise, and also Dougal Stewart's monument, the philosopher, which is also positioned in a certain way. And then you begin to look at the spatial relationships between these elements on the site. So they are fundamentally different as to how they relate to one another. So, and then if one begins to look at that in relation to the terracing effect of sitting on a terrace, which is quite deliberate, which comes from the road that Stevenson had created out of the side of the hill, blasted out of the side of the hill, and given retaining walls which are faced in rock masonry to give that sense of strength to the wall. And I'm sorry if this is, but I think it's actually a fundamental point that is being raised here. And then if you start to look at those elements of horizontality, and this is the very point that nobody has grasped either in architectural history or in any of the papers written beforehand, which gives the heritage statement its absolute uniqueness, and it pins down the point of the retaining wall and the belvedere of something that anchors that institutional building, being the school, into the site, and it controls the difference between the east playground and the west playground, and that makes them different. And it's why, if you look at the heritage statement, and you'll find it in case you want to do so, in pages 55 and 58 of that document, you'll see there Washington Wilson photographs that show that exactly what Hamilton had in his mind, that he was not frightened of terracing to the extent, or even of coalescence of buildings, which is being maintained as something which sets this building as being separate and in the round. It is something which controls the landscape or the topography in which the building is sitting, and it adds something harmoniously to the way in which that building, sitting on its rise, coming round the corner, which you appreciate for the first time, also links with the terraces, and you see that horizontal wall and the belvedere being part of that composition before it then coalesces with, from certain views, with Regent Terrace. That, to me, is the significance of that building, and why it isn't a temple. It is a series of temples which are arranged in a picturesque manner by the hand of genius to create this building. I'm sorry to go on at length about that, but I think
fine,
it is a fundamental
just
point.
to be absolutely clear, you support the building of a 6-storey hotel wing on both sides of it in the playground?
No, it's within the setting of how that setting has changed. I'm talking about something that existed perhaps, and this, you're asking me to address Hamilton's concept and in the notion of a temple, which is what Hamilton was designing at that time. I think it has to be accepted by the inquiry that that setting has changed. There have been other things that have happened to it, whereas in the East Playground now, instead of having an open playground where you can see that belvedere wall, the retaining wall and the belvedere, you now have a large building which rises above anything which is elsewhere.
Mr. Wright, I do appreciate that you are very engaged with the topic, and we've been asking you lots of questions for a long time, but I'm going to focus it down. Let's talk about the wall and the belvedere. You've described eloquently, and I'm not sure the reporters need to hear it again because they've heard it, how much you feel that the wall and the Belvedere are so important to Hamilton's vision. And others, I think, have views that disagree with you. But parking that for a moment, if either of these schemes go ahead, there will be more buildings in the eastern playground that will cover, from all southern distant viewpoints, more of the wall and the Belvedere. Is that not correct?
Yes, that is correct, but also it has to be regarded as a conservation benefit that the Belvedere and the wall will be seen for the first time in 130 years, since it was covered by the gymnasium building initially in 1885.
But only if you stand between the hotel and them, because there'll be a gap for these cars, won't there?
I think you'd need to put that question as to how many cars may be within that gap to the architects or the planning consultant, but I'm talking about something which is the physical space between the wings that are being proposed and the retaining wall in the back of and the rear of the building, and it is for that reason that I had requested that the plans, the Ordnance Survey plans, and understanding where the viewpoints were from, I think were brought to the inquiry so that we could understand better the approach that Hamilton had seen from the west and how his building should be appreciated within that.
I'm sure there was more evidence on that. I think there's probably little value going through that line by line, but I wanted just to pick up a couple of issues. The first relates to the picture and the disagreement you have with Dr. Carter-McGee about the picture that she attributes to Allen. Now, I think fairness requests that I put something to you, because you, in your rebuttal recognition, have criticised her. And this is in your rebuttal recognition on page 10. In your recognition, you've made a number of criticisms of Dr. Carter-McGee's evidence, and I suspect that the reporters are probably not going to find the issue about who started building the observatory that important. So I'm going to pass over that and just hope that we don't need to discuss it. We still disagree, but I think there's probably no value. But let's talk about the Upton Telescope or the Nelson Monument. Would you agree that the purpose of the Nelson Monument as designed was partly as a viewing platform, like the tower in Hulme Park in Alnwick?
Yes, I would agree with that.
So it may well simply be that you and Dr. Carter-McGee both agree that it is a viewing platform, and that's one of the reasons it has that shape, and that a happy coincidence of the shape is that other people think it looks like a telescope.
Yes, and an upturned one at that, which is, I suppose, relevant to or relative to the use to which it was put, which was essentially, as she acknowledges, and I think I acknowledge too, in terms of the relationship that monument has with the harbour and with shipping. And this is quite a common thing you find with many towers that are erected during the course of the Trafalgar Wars. The Napoleonic Wars, that these were very important landmarks that formed part of the defence of the country. There was an invasion of the French in Fishguard in 1797, and there's a very high alert amongst the militia, so it served an important purpose, and you'll find that other similar monuments would serve the same purpose, so I don't think we're disagreed on that point.
So the Nelson Monument is a means to look out from Carlton Hill, and it's something to look at from the rest of the city.
Yes, I was going to make that point. It's something which is meant to be seen on the top of the hill. It has the functional purpose of being seen from the Firth, but also from being seen from various vantage points around the city.
Closer in, its setting is interfered with by the western wing of these hotels, isn't it?
maybe in certain of the views, in which case I would have identified that and taken a proportionate and a balanced view as to what the level of impact would be in relation to each of those views.
Sure, we'll come back to those. Let's return to your rebuttal recognition and page 11 and paragraph 7G. Now, at that point, you say it's unhelpful for Ms. McGee, I'm assuming you mean Dr. Carter McGee, to quote from obscure sources as though they were a fact about the attribution of this picture. And this is the watercolour of the Hamilton building from behind, notionally from behind the Robert Burns Monument, isn't it?
Yes, it is, because that evidence was a personal communication that she had, I suspect, quite fairly, in terms of the production of what went into and understanding the illustrations that went into her beautifully illustrated book, which has just been published on Carlton Hill, which isn't before the inquiry. But in her own dissertation, I think, which is before the inquiry, which there is a core document reference for that, you'll see that she attributes the painting not to Thomas Allen, but to the generally accepted view at that time, at the time when she was writing the dissertation, and the view that would have been conveyed by the National Galleries in giving licenses for the license for the image, that in fact it was a combination of Thomas Hamilton and David Roberts, the watercolourist, who were involved in that exercise. As a matter of interest to the inquiry, in some respects I do agree with some of the points she makes. I think it was always slightly doubtful that the image really was 1850, because it's a curious thing to do, and at the time when you're droving cattle into the slaughterhouses in King's Stables Road, that's one indication of the date of that image. But it takes us straight back to the jail. And what you look in that image is the jail building is as it was designed, if one could believe the image that is being portrayed with the gate portals by Archibald Elliot, as opposed to the larger structure, which was the Thomas Brown edifice that followed. So my view is that it was probably from an earlier date, and it possibly, and I don't think that Ms. Carter McKee would necessarily disagree with this, but if you look very carefully, she makes no reference to this, but there is a beautifully illustrated copy of that image in her book, and when you look at the detail of that, you'll be able to see that it does have, it's not the building as it was erected, it is the building in its sort of perfectly conceived form, and it has within the pediment of the portico of the Greek temple the same sort of images of Greek relief carvings that appeared in his late submission to the Royal Scottish Academy. Is very similar to that, and you'll find also, and rather crucial to our understanding of the building, that in terms of the upper level between the upper pair of gates, that it also has an indication of carving at that point, which was never carried out. So one has to be able to, I don't think she makes any mention of that, but you have to be able to apply that level of understanding to understand both authorship and date as something that becomes a consideration.
Just returning to your rebuttal recognition, why is it unhelpful for Dr. Carter McGee to add to her recognition information she's obtained after her PhD was produced, albeit that it obtained in a very obscure field and an unpublished source, and yet somehow okay for you not to provide citations, as Miss Coburn went through in your document? Why is she being unhelpful?
I think as matters have turned out, I think it has been helpful to have that discussion. We could have a further debate on whether it was Thomas Allen or not, but that is beyond the bounds of this inquiry.
I think we should move on, because any sympathy the rest of the inquiry has for time you're giving evidence will evaporate if we keep having that. Let's move. It's 15:15. I think there's a little bit I can do before a logical break. I don't want to perambulate back again along Waterloo Place, but I just want to return to William Stark briefly. And it's CD 624. And I'm going to try and do this as tightly as I can, so I'm going to ask you to perhaps 64 to it's page 8. So this is the report to the Lord Provost in 1814, which has been touched upon. And I have a relatively precise question to ask at the end of page 8 about the paragraph that begins "on the other hand."
I confirm I have that. Thank you.
I was going to just read the paragraph and ask you a couple of questions and try and keep them as tight as I can. On the other hand, there are not unfrequently in a bending alignment of streets much beauty and perhaps the most striking effects. Public buildings break upon the eye at the most favourable points of view, showing at once a front and a flank. They are seen at a proper distance and under a proper angle, but if placed at the extremity or even at the side of a long and straight line of street, they are described too soon, and expectation and interest have subsided ere they have assumed the form and magnitude most calculated to please and strike. Now, the first thing I want to just point out is the mention of a front and a flank. I'm assuming that means that we're not limited to just seeing a building at its corner. There could be different fronts and different flanks being seen at the same time.
Yes, I fully accept that, and it's crucial to understanding Thomas buildings within its setting, I think, to have that awareness.
And the latter section might be a way of imagining that on a long road where there is limited of interest to look, it's rather nice to have the feature at the end revealed gradually, so it's not described too soon, and that's a useful technique in urban planning.
Yes, and I fully recognise that in the Heritage Statement, in terms of recognising not only Stark's contribution but also the later contributions of others which also describe that scene. In particular, Colin McWilliams' insightful description, his perambulation as part of his book on Scottish Townscape, which covers the same issues.
So one of the great things about walking along Waterloo Place and Regent Terrace, whether it's past a prison or the Scottish Government, is that the Royal High School is not described too soon. Expectation and interest does not subside. You see little bits and then you see a little bit more. Is that a fair description?
Yes, that's absolutely fair. Yeah.
Imagine we're in the Western Playground, or actually just outside it. Let's stand, if we can imagine, just where the Portakabin was for the campaign for the Scottish Parliament. So we're on the north pavement. Obviously we're only going up the terrace, we're not planning to go anywhere else. And we see in front of us the lodge. Now, you would accept that the lodge is part of the setting of the building when seen from the west.
I accept it's part of the setting of the building when seen from the west, yes.
And then it's been positioned hard up against the boundary of the access road on Carlton Hill Terrace, so that it obscures as little of the western flank of the Royal Hamilton building as possible.
But it does, I think you'd accept, interfere with the openness of the view that Hamilton has created between his building and the boundary wall, on account of narrowing the view.
In order to stand in a position where the lodge blocks the northern face of the Hamilton building, one would have to be relatively close to the lodge, wouldn't you?
That is not the case at all, and you'll find there are illustrations within the Heritage Statement, and particularly under a section in Part 2, and if I'm not suggesting everyone looks at that at the moment, but it's very clear that there are matters there that are deemed detrimental to the setting of Hamilton's building. One of those includes the lodge, in which it, with the classroom together, makes it impossible to see the temple, which is the fundamental issue that Hamilton was creating by setting his temple forward it's as far forward on the site as he could probably get, but also it is that element of the plan of the three-dimensional form which he also sets back so that you get a very clear view onto that element. The point at which you should see that and appreciate it for the first time, with the pleasure of having arrived at that point, at that particular part of the pavement, and I can illustrate that to the inquiry if one were to refer to the supplementary images, but I will take questions for you.
I'm going to come to the images later, probably after lunch. I think we should do that bit, because I'm not sure I entirely agree with you, but we'll deal with it after lunch. I think I could just finish the section I'm doing without resolving that disagreement between us now, by dealing with the fact that the lodge, whether it's a Tempietto or not, reflects the classical aspirations of the Hamilton building, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, and those matters are taken into account in terms of its special interest, which is also dealt with by me in Part 2 of the Heritage Statement.
And the lodge avoids competing with the prominence of scale the Hamilton building, accepting there's the issue about the Northern Temple we'll return to.
Yes, I accept that. Yeah.
And I think you've already accepted that from the west, this arrival at the building has many of the elements of the picturesque to it.
Yes, it complies wholly with Stark's dictum, and indeed I recognise that, and I also quote Stark. It's the one that I'm being criticised for not having given a reference for, but at least it is absent in Mr. Lowry's paper. It's absent also, except as a footnote in Miss McKee's dissertation, that I bring it to the fore into the text because I consider it important and should not be overlooked, that it does contribute to Stark's dictum, and it's an important way of reading the building as part of that procession and the approach from the west. And if I could remind the inquiry, because I am being accused of saying that it has no value whatsoever, that is reflected in the descriptions of the Carlton scheme, quite concisely in that, but also in the value of the views that I've given from Waterloo Place. If I thought otherwise, I would not have given it that high status.
Again, we're standing outside this western playground, outside the gates. Do you see this large, open to the extent we can ignore the PSA's trees, this large open playground in some way as unfinished or unbalanced or unresolved?
Apart from the detrimental factors to which you've alluded in terms of landscaping, and also, of course, what we have at the moment, which I think it's fair to include in this assessment, is the 1946 classroom block, which sits above the level of the gate lodge and also interferes with the openness of that view that one would hope to have towards the temple at the head of the rise.
We'll return to that view later, because I think I'll need to get all the photographs ready, and I don't want to do that before lunch. But a playground is an essential element for a school. You'd accept that?
I very much accept that, and I think it continued right up to 1968 in that particular form. There's evidence to show that from other papers that are in front of the inquiry. The playground, I'm sure as the reporters would have seen when we were on site, it's really I think it's really a casualty of Hamilton's ambitions in terms of wanting to place the building where he did, where you had something which was almost like a perfectly symmetrical plan in the sense of the kidney shapes of the two playgrounds which emanate from the central building. But the West Playground was far more useful as a playground than the East Playground ever was, and that's to do with the slopes that he had to accommodate. The ground was falling away quite considerably there, so it was always going to have limited use as a playground, and it was for that reason that Robson's insight in the 1870s of school playgrounds, I think, is of particular interest to the inquiry, because it's around the time that the school board was set up in Scotland after the 1872 Education Act, and how playgrounds were important. It was recognised in Hamilton's plan, and it partly, I think, is an explanation as to why that piece of open ground remained in that form until 1968. Yes, otherwise
I'll do that again because it won't have come across. The playground is a place that the people who built the classroom block chose not to build the classroom block in. They built it up against the north wall in order to avoid being in the western playground.
Yes, that has to be right, otherwise it's not a building of great, and I think it's generally accepted by all that it's an austerity building built at an austerity period. And for it to have been in the middle of the playground, I think it would have had goalposts put on either end of it so that it has some use within that open space.
Even the austerity architects who built that didn't want to build in the western playground because it's a highly sensitive location for change, isn't it?
I think there's a disconnect between what you've just said and what the evidence I've been giving to the inquiry about it being an open playground.
I think we'll move on to the walls and the boundaries. You've talked on the site visit, some of us were there, very enthusiastically about the boundary ironwork, the stuff that's there and the stuff that's not, and the stuff that you can just see and the stuff that you can't. Why do you see the western playground as alien?
I don't understand. Have I said somewhere that something is alien, that the western playground is alien in some form? I think it unlikely that I would have done that.
There's about a couple more questions and then I'll be able to stop for lunch. Page 60 of your first report, 197, in the caption to the aerial photograph. If you look at the caption when you get there, you'll find that at the bottom of the caption you've put the copyright to HES Aerofilms Collection, and directly above it is a sentence: the expanse of the West Playground appears as an alien feature within the scene in this view.
Could you give me the page?
Page 60.
Is that of 197?
197, Mr. Steele.
Yes, it's alien in the sense, in terms of looking at that image, in terms of a fairly large expanse of flat area which has a gravel surface or something similar, which is similar to the roads as the rest of the site that we're looking at in terms of the Carlton Hill has vegetation or structures on it in some form.
So in a sense it's no more alien than the Esplanade at Edinburgh Castle, is it?
No, in that respect it isn't. It's a playground.
And no one's proposing to put a hotel on the Esplanade of Edinburgh Castle?
There is no... Edinburgh Castle, if I could remind you, is in the care of the Scottish ministers and has no need for. What it does have, though, and I think that would be an interesting matter for debate for this inquiry, is that there are temporary structures that go up for the purpose of conducting the what's it called, the tattoo appear, and they go up and they come down again, which I think is an interesting consideration in that.
So, just to focus on before lunch, perhaps if you had the opportunity to reflect over lunch of whether there's any examples that you've seen in the papers of schemes that were discussed at the workshops that did not involve 150-bed hotels and did not involve development on the Western Playground. Because we discussed that at the beginning, and I will have to turn to it with Mr. Gibb, but if you have any recollection, it would be of assistance. Perhaps this would be a good opportunity to break.
Sorry, I was busy writing. Was that a question to Mr. Wright?
It was more a request, because I feel that it's something that Mr. Wright has said, and I've got no note anywhere of any such scheme in the papers, and I'm sure I can discuss it with other witnesses, but I wouldn't want Mr. Wright not to have the opportunity in case he has a recollection.
You've asked him to reflect on that over the
If he can. I know he's got a lot. It's been a long day, but if he could reflect, I'd be grateful.
Okay, perfect. Let's stop there for lunch and start again at 1:30.